I don't want one position. I want all positions.
Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys.
I'm Liam, this is Rob, and welcome to the Hey You Guys podcast. This week we're looking back at one of the most beloved and unique sci-fi movies of the 90s, and dare I say, a top 5 Bruce Willis movie? Maybe a bit bold there. Also, is this one of the most successful cult movies of all time? I don't know what the exact cutoff is. I mean, how much can a movie make before it's ineligible to be considered a cult movie? And by the way, that's an actual question. That's the end of my introduction. So, I'm actually expecting a response on that. Is there actually... Because when I watch this film, I still think of it as something of a cult movie, despite the fact in 1996, 97, it made 260 odd million. But in my head, I still feel like it's a cult movie. But I'm like, can it be that when it's made that much money and it's this successful?
I think it can, because a Luc Besson film is its own animal.
Yes,
it
really is.
Film becomes cult movies themselves.
Yeah, he's like an auteur of cult movies, regardless of how much money they make.
It doesn't, because you can make this film where you said it made 200 odd million, and then I appreciate the timing isn't like he didn't go on next to do it, but then he'll do Lockout or Valerian.
Well, Valerian feels like a kind of spiritual... Basically, Valerian feels like what would happen if this movie went wrong. It's like this movie, but they don't get the cast quite right. The tone isn't quite right. The dialogue isn't quite there. And then you end up with Valerian. And it is a one-sided, because this movie on paper really shouldn't work, but it absolutely does because of those individual elements, because they got the casting right, because the dialogue, all these things.
I mean, look at it, right? He went to... from directing this, because he actually directed this one, because what a lot of people don't seem to get is when you say a Luc Besson film, he's written loads.
Oh, it's kind of like he's like the French Joel Silver in many respects. He's got his fingerprints on a lot of movies which he didn't necessarily direct.
Yeah, so he's only directed he directed The Fifth Element. He directed Leon.
Yeah, or what's that called? It's got a different name in America, isn't it? It's like Leon the. Not The Assignment, it's something like that, something ridiculous. Yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. Sure. Sorry, I derailed things then. I
did Leon, and after Fifth Element, he did Joan of Arc. I mean, come on.
Oh, that was also with Milla Jovovich, wasn't it?
Milla Jovovich, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He went from doing... And in order to answer your question in a roundabout way, yes, it can be considered a cult movie because of Luc Besson. Luc Besson is the definition of cult, I believe. Like, you would have people follow his works, whether they be shit, whether they be good. I mean, you could start looking at a lot of the films that he wrote. I've already said Lockout. There's From Paris with Love. There's Lucy.
Angel A.
I don't know what Angel A is. I'm pretty sure
Nikita was his first big one as well.
Taxi. Obviously, everyone loved. The original, not the one with Jimmy Fallon and Queen Latifah.
Yeah, definitely not.
But that's still going. Taxi is still going. I think it's on like Taxi 7.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I've never even seen the original one, but that's like a good point. And we mentioned it last week when we did Streets of Fire, the whole Joel Silver element, because I mentioned even though he didn't direct it, there are elements of that film where you're just like, Joel Silver said, more rain, more neon. Those are kind of, signifiers that Joel Silver's got his fingerprints on this film. And it's the same, I mean, obviously he directed this film, and this is pure, unadulterated Luc Besson. In the same way that, I only think maybe Valerian comes close to it. Because above all else, obviously there are numerous things which make what fundamentally makes up a Luc Besson film. But first and foremost, he's a visual auteur. The only other director that comes close to his style of visual storytelling is maybe Terry Gilliam. You think of 12 Monkeys as being like the opposite side of this coin. Like, this is like the day glow version of 12 Monkeys. Like, it's totally overly designed in the same way that 12 Monkeys is. A lot of the stuff, it's mechanical design over, fundamentally making sense. Those suits, for instance, whether it be the aliens or the cops, you look at it and you're like, well, that doesn't make any practical sense. But it looks absolutely awesome, so it's absolutely fine. So you just kind of get on with it.
Before we get into The Fifth Element, we've already mentioned Luc Besson, so I want to give him credit on writing one of my absolute favorite films of all time.
What's that?
District 13.
Did he write that?
Yeah.
I had no idea you wrote that.
Yeah, with Cyril Rafia and David Bell, and David Bell came back to do the Paul Walker version, Brick
Mhm.
Mansions.
So wait, just to be clear, right? Let's break down that sentence. Do you say that was one of your favorite movies?
District 13, not Brick Mansions. District 13.
Yeah, but still, District 13. I mean, it's still a quite bold
I think
statement.
it's fantastic. I loved it. You've seen it, yeah?
Yeah. I'm just like, it's a bold statement to say
No.
District 13.
Oh, come on. Have we met?
It's just one of, I'm somewhat famed supposedly for my kind of hard lefts, but I was just about to mention, about how this movie was inspired by Fritz Lang's 1927 masterpiece Metropolis, and how, Blade Runner takes it into the dark, gritty direction, and because it obviously was a black and white movie, and this is like the day glow equivalent, and then all of a sudden we're talking about how District 13 is one of your favorite movies. I'm like, how the fuck did this happen?
Because I was drinking last night, so
You were drinking last night. We'll put this down to the booze, but
Yeah.
no. Jokes aside, it's interesting you say that, because other than Fifth Element, and I absolutely adore Fifth Element, I've always liked Luc Besson films rather than loved them. I've always appreciated the fact that he is that visual auteur, and I love directors that swing for the fences, and even the aforementioned Valerian, which doesn't necessarily work, it still comes under the kind of interesting failure. And I love the fact that, somebody gave him 200 million to make that absolute folly, in the same way that this was a folly, but this is a successful folly, is the other end of the spectrum. But no, Luc Besson films, he's never, if someone asked me who's my top 10 directors, I don't think Luc Besson would be anywhere near the list.
No, but I'm really shocked because Luc Besson is not. We're saying Besson and Besson, however you say his name.
Besson, it doesn't matter. We're British.
He is not. When you say director, he hasn't directed.
He hasn't directed much.
Like, he's written loads. He's produced absolute. Like, he's pretty. It's like Luc Besson presents, like a Quentin Tarantino joint. It's just he's put his name to anything and everything, but he hasn't actually directed a lot. So the fact that you go bringing it back to The Fifth Element, he directed The Fifth Element.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely see the style that he's trying to keep when he moves on to Valerian.
Mm-hmm.
Say, with, as you say, the day glowness of it, the brightness of space, the things like that. I want to get back to what you said about the. We'll get to the space cops, but the aliens right at the beginning, and this interested me. Right, I love the credits.
Oh, with their weird names. Are they the Mondo Shawan? I think they are the ones who, like, with the ridiculous armor.
I do love at the beginning when you get the credits and you have and Luke Perry. It should have.
I had that written down. I was like,
should have had underneath and Luke Perry for 45 seconds.
Well, there's two things right there. We need to break that down. One, he's only in it for 45 seconds. And even despite that, in 1997, was Luke Perry befitting of an and? Like, you look like in this, like, don't get me wrong, Luke Perry might have got an and in some movies, but in a movie with a cast that includes, let's go through some of this. I mean, Mila Jovovich, Chris Tucker, we'll get to Chris Tucker in a minute. You've got to remember, in 1997, Chris Tucker, and this is not hyperbole, is one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Make no mistake.
Yeah.
Bruce Willis, Gary Oldman, Ian Holm, Tommy Lister Jr., Brian James, all these people, and it's like, he gets the and for 45 seconds worth of work. I don't know, man. I think his agent has done amazing work there, to say the least.
Like, if he got the and, he had he had a paycheck, like, deserving of that, didn't he? That was
100. It makes about as much sense as the thermal bandages that are applied to Mila Jovovich. I mean, I've got a lot of questions. Again, that whole idea that this movie takes kind of mechanical design over kind of common sense, or visual design. Sorry, I do apologize, over common sense, because one, I got the question, like, under all those bulky suits, are they all super hot 90s models? Because don't get me wrong, this film is awash with super hot 90s models. They are all over this film. I mean, even in smaller parts, I can't remember their names. I had them written down. Sybil Buck as Zorg's assistant. She's the one who always stands out for me. But, one is every alien a super hot Mila Jovovich. And two, what happens if the person who came out of that suit actually looked like they belonged in that suit, and then you just applied the same thermal bandages?
Yeah.
It would be quite disappointing, wouldn't it? I mean, it'd be a very different film.
They would have needed a bigger tube. It's like they knew perfectly because that incubation chamber or whatever they had going on with that.
It was made for Mila Jovovich and Bruce Willis to have sex in. It was just about big enough for them to have sex in that creepy final sequence.
But the most boring sex ever, because there's no Kama Sutra positions going on in that tube.
No, definitely not. And that's maybe my least favorite part. Like, few things age this film. The special effects have held up surprisingly well. You know, when you think of the special effects of this film, I think, and it comes back to the whole Fritz Lang homage, is the scene in what looks like kind of future New York, I suppose, and the taxi scene, and when Leeloo walks out into the sea. It always actually reminds me of rather than another movie, it reminds me of the Bethesda video games. You know, like in Oblivion or Skyrim or Fallout, there's always the sequence when you're indoors and you go into a crummy tunnel, and then there's a bit when you walk out and you're like, holy shit, look at the size of this. And they do that with this film, and you have like Leeloo coming out and like wide-eyed looking at this city. And that's the big special effects moment in this film. And it looks really good still. I was genuinely concerned going back to this because I haven't seen it for a number of years. I was like, are moments like that really going to look like those kind of mid-90s special effects movies now? And a lot of them, you know, films such as Soldier, for instance, or Escape from LA, which I tried to rewatch Escape from LA. I was rewatching it. I was like, this isn't that bad. It got to the special effects. I turned it off. I couldn't fucking deal with it. Yeah. This film, on the other hand, which was made, I think, the same year, holds up miraculously well. Unbelievably well, and it's moments like that in particular which really still shine.
That's where a big budget gets you. Do you know what doesn't hold up in this film?
What's that?
Bruce Willis's Uncle Touchy moments.
Oh yeah, well, at least they deal with it. You know, not without my permission.
Gun on him.
Was it electrozygamate or something like that? And it's like, oh, what does that mean? Not without my permission. He's like, yeah, I thought so. It's like he shouldn't have kissed her when she was sleeping. This isn't, you know, Sleeping Beauty. But at least in this film, there are immediate, you know, repercussions. Yeah, he does, within moments of doing that, have a gun to his head, and he's like, okay, yeah, I was a dick. I shouldn't have done that.
Can we go back to the beginning, because we joked about Luke Perry for 45 seconds? Mm-hmm. Would you trust that monk?
No, he looked like a Disney bad guy. Like that's what he reminded me of.
Like Rasputin.
He did. He literally looked like he was drawn to look untrustworthy. Yeah. To the point where you're like, when you find out that he is trustworthy, like he's a good guy, you're like, no fucking way is that a good guy. He looks so evil.
Because he's poisoning them as well. What you think?
But he's doing it for the right reason.
You don't know if it's like actual poison or if it's just knockout juice or whatever. But ostensibly, when you're watching that to start with, he's putting some liquid in water.
Yeah.
And the way that dude looks, he's poisoning them.
Yeah. But even like that bit actually sets the tone perfectly for this film. Because one of the reasons that this film stands out and why it's so successful is that this film is ludicrous. But it also manages to take itself seriously. Like right from the off, you've got like that kind of visual gag where he keeps and it's an old-fashioned one, but it's filmed very well. Where he keeps going to drink the poison or whatever it is, and then keeps putting the drink down. But at the same time, you know, you have all these moments of levity and comedy. But the important thing, and I think what fundamentally makes this movie work, is that the threat always feels real. Like Zorg is fantastic in this film. Like he almost feels buffoonish, but at the same time, you're like, but you wouldn't want to fuck with him. Like he seems genuinely threatening in the same way. What's the big monster in space, Mr. Black? Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I can't remember that.
Oh, Mr. Shadow, that's it. But yeah, Zorg and like Mr. Shadow in particular, like they're genuine threats in this film. So you have your fun moments, but at the same time, you're like, well, you need that levity. And that's why, for instance, you know, when you look at the cast, Bruce Willis is so perfect for this film. Because, sorry.
I was just say, you said about Bruce Willis, he has the best hero name ever.
Oh, Corbin Dallas is such a great name.
Dallas, like, come on.
It's such a great... I mean, there's great names in this, but if nothing else, what this film does, and I know this is a 90s film, but it kind of really doubles down on the idea that Bruce Willis is easily the most versatile of the 80s action stars. Like, Arnie and Sly couldn't pull this film off. Yeah. They could not pull off that kind of dual threat that he has of being part of it is the fact that, yeah, he's been in the army and stuff, but he just looks like an everyday dude. Like he looks like a taxi driver in a way that Arnie and Sly in the mid-90s would never fucking look like a taxi driver. But at the same time, He's got enough about him that you don't actually have to explain that he's tough. He just fucking is. You just buy into it immediately.
You mean you didn't buy Sly as a taxi driver in Daylight, and then all of a sudden he's not a taxi driver? You think, oh no, he's a Marine or something. No, he's a paramedic.
Yeah, well, it was kind of like what was it, Steven Seagal in Under Siege, where he's a cook, but he's also like the baddest motherfucker on the planet. But that's the thing, you don't buy. You know, it becomes immediately ludicrous. Whereas in this, you buy into it, and the reason is, of all those guys who kind of came through in the 80s, early 90s, he's, rather than an action hero or whatever you want to call them, he's a dramatic actor who just so happens to star in the greatest action movie of all time.
Yeah.
And just so happens to work on both ends of the spectrum. Like, you know, you look at, I mean, we've already mentioned in this podcast, 12 Monkeys, Sixth Sense, Unbreakable. These are all films where you look at the other guy, like Steven Seagal couldn't do The Sixth Sense or Unbreakable. It's just out of the question.
He's weird, isn't he? Because he's so moldable. He can mold himself around the story back then. Mm-hmm. I mean, we won't get into poor Bruce Willis films these days, but he can mold himself around the character, and then he becomes. And you're not just thinking, oh my God, he's just like, he doesn't fit that role. He doesn't fit the bad guy. He doesn't fit, like he fits perfectly what he's doing. And in this, you absolutely believe he's just a scumbag taxi driver until you realize, oh no, he's like super soldier.
Yeah, you buy into, but again, they don't have to over-explain it. And again, it's the visual storytelling in this film, which is so fantastic, which allows the narrative to keep moving at such a great pace. Like, it doesn't feel the need. There's no opening kind of sprawl about the state of the earth. Like, don't get me wrong, this is the brightest a dystopian world has ever been.
Yeah.
But instead of like seeing all these colors and thinking everything's fine, you don't have to be told that this is a dystopian future. You're like, yeah, you can see by the way that the police act, by the you know, even his tiny little cigarettes, that everything's controlled. There's a hint of 1984 about it, but they don't have to hit you over the head over it. They just let the world explain it to you in the same way. Like, a great sequence, and you know, it speaks to the fact that this film has become oddly quotable amongst me and my friends, but it's always really silly quotes. It's the dude who tries to rob him at the door, and he's got like the weird hat on. Yeah. Like, that could just be a scene usually where a dude tries to rob Bruce Willis or Corbin Dallas, and it's just to prove that Corbin Dallas is a badass. Of course it does that, but it also delivers this bizarre, needless character, and it's like, take it. I don't need it. Give me the cash. Like, to this day, I'll be at a bar with one of the guys, and it's like going up for a drink with someone. Give me the cash. Like, why we're quoting these bizarro characters? But that's what this film has. It has all those memorable side characters as well as the leading cast.
It doesn't happen anymore. But when I used to get ID'd, you show me your ID and you go, multi-pass.
Multi-pass. Well, that brings us quite nicely onto Mila Jovovich. And
sorry.
Carry on.
Mila Jovovich, you mentioned the mugging scene. I just wanted to ask a question. He must have very understanding neighbours, I thought, Corbin Dallas, especially upstairs neighbours.
Yeah.
Does his gun rack go upstairs?
Yeah, it looks like that, doesn't it?
When he takes the gun off the guy and the gun rack comes down, it doesn't like extend. It just comes down like a lift. So do his neighbours just have the guns in like their cupboard or their living room or something? And then
I do not have an answer to that, but what I do have an answer to is like why this podcast works so well is how differently you and I watch films, because there's always something which gets on your, you know, drives you insane. I'm like, I think I could have watched this film 100 times and I never would have thought about the fact that the gun rack went upstairs into someone else's flat. But now you make the point, I'm like, yeah, absolutely goes upstairs. Like, you're just sitting there watching TV and then your neighbor's gun rack flies into the living room. You're like, what the fuck, dude?
I love as well. Because I know it's a bit further on then. Sorry, we will get back to Mila Jovovich.
Oh, no, it's fine.
But I do love the fact that when he's hiding everybody in his tiny ass apartment, like the fridge goes down, the shower goes up, all this shit. I love all that. And the coppers come to the door and they've got this weird viewing window and he's got to put his hands on the yellow. Yeah. And identify yourself. I am a meat popsicle. What the fuck's that about?
I don't know. It's a weird line. But actually, speaking of all, and again, the kind of different people we are, you looked at all that stuff in the flat and you're like, oh, this goes up, this goes down. All I remember from his apartment, whatever you want to call it, is the fact that he had one of the greatest cats of all time. I don't think that cat gets nearly enough credit. Everyone thinks of Jonesy in Alien as being like the great sci-fi cat. I'm not sure if we ever get the cat's name in this film, but it's a great fucking cat.
I think we do. I couldn't tell you what the cat's name is, but
Or maybe
think
I'm
we do.
kind of making my own point there where I can't remember the cat's name. So I
I
do
do love-
apologize if.
I do love when they're feeding the cat Thai food.
Yeah, yeah.
And you got the really happy-go-lucky guy in his rickshaw boat flying spaceship thing, and he comes to your window to serve you Thai food, which is a fantastic idea, by the way.
Yeah, it's basically kind of like I don't know, a more romantic version of Uber Eats, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
totally.
cooking, and he's like, "Oh, you got a message. It's a great message. Everything will turn up for you." And he goes, "If not, I'll give you dinner for free." You are fired. And he says it in such a jovial way.
Oh, dude, you've done so well, and I'm not going to do it either. But you've done so well not to do an impression of that character
Yes.
because it's so much fun. Like, of course, I think nowadays people would be like, if you went for it, it'd be borderline racist. But again, I'm like, if I did an impression of that character, it's only out of love because just like the dude robbing him at the door, it's another one of those characters who has 2 minutes on screen,
Yeah.
is almost needless, but absolutely knocks it out of the park. Everybody is throwing 100 miles per hour in this film. Everybody. Except for one person who we will get to a little bit later. But
Okay. Right.
that'll come under the hate category for sure.
Should we bring us back to Mila Jovovich?
Or Mila, yeah, she spoiler it, she's in the love category because she is so good in this film. Like, she's like equal parts vulnerable, but she's like totally believable when she, as a strong female action hero. And it's something I don't think she gets enough credit for because the problem she has, kind of like, what's his name? GoldenEye, James Bond.
Pierce Brosnan.
Pierce Brosnan,
Okay.
is that Pierce Brosnan was a great James Bond, but in a bunch of, other than GoldenEye, arguably, in a bunch of pretty bad Bond films.
Yeah.
And I feel like Mila Jovovich is maybe one of the greatest and one of the most believable female action heroes of the last 30 years. But she just happens to, other than this, have been in a lot of very bad films. Like, you never watch, say, like one of the Resident Evil films, one of the many Resident Evil films, or even the recent Monster Hunter film. She's never the problem. She's always good in bad films.
Yeah.
But luckily, at least in this, she's fantastic in a equally fantastic film. But
The problem
you
with her
totally
is-
buy her as this like kind of perfect being,
The problem with her, 90% of the film she does these days
Mm-hmm.
is directed by her husband.
Yeah.
And
Which,
we've already Paul W.S. Anderson,
mhm.
who we've already established has only ever made one good film, and it's Soldier. So
Just to be clear to anyone listening, if you haven't listened to the Event Horizon podcast, I strongly disagree with that statement.
but yeah, he's a what? You think he's made two? Soldier and Avenger.
I absolutely don't. I absolutely Soldier's
So,
the worst.
I do have
I think I've funny enough already used Soldier as an example of terrible mid-90s action movies.
I conveniently ignored that.
Oh, I
But
see.
she is a good actor in terrible films, but she does well in this, and I don't want to. Obviously, she carries the action part of it, the martial arts scenes she does. Like, I think she's absolutely great, and the chemistry between them starts to get much better as time goes on. Like, she's just someone who just dove into his taxi, like headfirst, literally. And then as time goes on, then he realizes that he's fallen in love with her, and she needed that all along, because that is obviously, spoiler alert, the fifth element. So
Yeah, and that makes sense for it to kind of because at first, of course, like the point of the film, and you need Mila Jovovich for this to work, is that everybody falls in love with her.
Yeah.
You get that all the way through the film, and some people could criticize it as a male gaze thing, but the whole idea is that she is supposed to be the perfect being, and you buy her as that, but she also needs to be vulnerable as well as a total badass. She totally pulls that off. The whole wide-eyed thing. I mentioned earlier the scene in the city when she comes out and sees all. Part of that, as great as the special effects, as the visual design is, a big part of the reason that works is her wide-eyed wonderment, that mix of kind of like awe and scared. Which like, but even like the adorable bits, like the bit when she gets stuck in, the magic showers, which go up into the neighbor's room, when she comes back down and she looks like a wet cat from like a GIF, and she's, oh my God, you do want to take care of her, but at the same time, she can absolutely take care of herself.
poor Brian
But-
James Mine getting jammed in the fridge.
I thought, because I forgot he was in the movie later on.
Yeah.
And when I was watching it, and they play that scene for laughs, because Ian Holm, Cornelius, like hits Bruce Willis over the head to take his tickets after he's been stuck in the fridge. And I was, or the freezer. And I was like, are we supposed to laugh at the fact that he's just killed those two men? But of course, like later on, they obviously somehow get out. But I forgot about that. And I was like, I think they're playing their murder for laughs, but okay, it's that kind of film, I guess.
That was a quick freeze as well.
It was a very quick freeze. I mean, I guess if you freeze that quick, it's kind of, would it be cryogenically frozen so you're safe rather than he comes out and he's got like frostbite and he loses all of his fingers? I don't know.
That apartment is just a murder apartment. You drown somebody, you freeze somebody, or you suffocate somebody in your bed.
Oh, yeah. There's so many ways to kill somebody. Those beds are not safe at all.
Can you imagine pressing the wrong button or it just malfunctioning while you're sleeping and all of a sudden it's just wrapped you up?
Well, the thing is, at that point, it feels like which torture device would you choose in that apartment? Because he has 3 people to hide. One, he almost drowns in Lilu.
Yeah.
Another one, he freezes. And then Ian Holmes, he suffocates. I'm like, Jesus Christ, dude. How fucking... And that was all without his gun rack.
Yeah.
I guess the 4th option would just be shot to death. So, yeah, for such a tiny, tiny apartment, there's a surprisingly large number of ways to kill oneself.
I do feel that all his neighbours have just got his shit dealing with, there's Corbyn's bed again. Wait, it's got a man in it.
Corbyn. Yeah. What's he like?
Yeah.
What a character. Unbelievable.
Oh, my God.
Sorry, go back to... But she is great in this. And
oh, no, she is. She's like, to me, she feels like the kind... Because she doesn't really get the recognition in the same... And again, I think it speaks to the kind of movies she's been in. But to my mind, she's kind of like the female Jason Statham. Like, she's just like a surprisingly dependable action star. In the same way, like, you looked at Jason Statham and thought, I'm kind of surprised he was good enough to kind of, like, hold his own movies. I don't think anybody watched Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and thought, oh, yeah, he'll be like a mid-range, dependable action hero. And the big part of that is being believable as an action hero. It's like Jason Statham, whatever you might say about him, you put him in a leading role and you believe the fact that he's a badass. And it's the same with Mila Jovovich. And it's a miracle in this film in particular, because I think this was her first major role, or maybe even her first role full stop.
No, I know this. She did randomly return to the Blue Lagoon.
Oh, yeah, she did. That's a good point. I think she may have actually done something else as well. But this is like, but for her to be dropped into this film, and at the start, like, she's so, again, to use that word again, like, so vulnerable, so wide-eyed. And then her being able to just totally switch it on into action hero mode, and for you to go along for that ride, and for not to be weird. And that can happen to a lot of, and maybe it's not fair, but it does happen. If you cast the wrong female lead and suddenly they're punching and kicking dudes who are twice their size, sometimes it just doesn't work. You see it and you're like, I don't buy it. I don't buy that this woman who weighs 120 pounds could just kick the shit out of all these giant dudes. But when she does it, you're like, oh, I buy it. I buy the fact that she is the ultimate being, and then she's just whipping everyone's ass. And it's one of those things I don't think you can teach. You can't teach that. You can't coach speed. It's just you have it or you don't, and she has it.
Apparently with that character you can, because she just needs the internet to learn everything, and she's done.
Yeah, well, there is the whole internet thing. Like, she learns the internet, and they try and add that drama to like the final sequence. It kind of feels like the end of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where they're trying to add a sense of threat, despite the fact that all the pieces are already in place. And it's just, she just has to stand there at that point.
Yeah.
And it's the end of the film. But they have to have the whole internet thing when she gets sad and then suddenly she doesn't want to stop and I really thought at that point, I was like, the end of the film is going to fall completely flat because I hadn't seen it for ages. But then it comes back to the chemistry thing. As soon as Bruce Willis has her in her arms and he's whispering into her ear and everyone's like, say it. And it should be cheesy. Like the whole thing about him saying, I love you. And all of a sudden I'm watching it and I was totally in. I was totally in again. I was like, say it, Bruce. Say that you love her. It's so fucking ridiculous. But I mean, don't get me wrong. The second half of this film isn't as good as the first half. It's just not. But it's still fucking fantastic.
I know why he loved the mind. Because
Mila Jovovich.
Well, yeah, that. And if she's completed the internet, then she's got some skills now after watching all that internet porn that he's going to want.
Well, it doesn't matter because they have to have sex in that tiny little tube. So there's no chat. Like, you have all the knowledge in the world. You have every volume of the Kama Sutra, and all you can do is missionary forever, apparently. While everybody watches as well. It's very strange in that weird room with tinfoil walls. You know, they talk about how it's like totally, you know, they can't get through the glass. She breaks through the glass and then she jumps through tinfoil walls. I'm like, come on, guys, you could have better security.
What is
than that.
with the future mind and having?
What is with the future? Yeah.
What the fuck is with the future?
What's going on with the future?
And having beds in like cramped spaces. It's
I know.
that when they were traveling to Floston Paradise, and they've got to roll into these weird cargo hold things, and I know they put them to sleep, but it's just it's like capsule hotels in Japan, isn't it? Which wouldn't work for me and you, especially not you. You're 13 foot tall.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I used an overnight train going from where is it? Malaysia to Thailand, and I remember I pulled down the bed and it was a cot. It was a goddamn cot, and I'm 6'7", and I was like, this is not gonna work. So I had about 17 seconds of sleep on that. But no, like I guess the good thing is, and maybe the point of it is that the size of the bed doesn't matter because you get put to sleep. Is that you know you don't have to worry about size and being comfy. It's just you get like even going to Floston Paradise on like a 5-star kind of space cruise, you still get put to sleep. You know, there's no option. There's no like late nights. Once you're in bed, lights out, you are going to sleep, and that's all there is to it.
I've always wondered, right, when they put them to sleep, you got to be waking up with some sort of hangover, haven't they? Because when I was wondering,
is it? Yeah.
Because when I put to sleep before surgery, wake up feeling like terrible. Like I've been drinking all night.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, the thing is, I thought at some point maybe the reason they were getting put to sleep was the space travel element of it. Yeah. But it's obviously not that, because other people are having, I mean, you know, only a Luc Besson film, only The Fifth Element, is in the middle of a multi-million-pound sci-fi, possibly family space movie, is having a sex scene intercut with a space launch. Yeah. It's very unsubtle. It's very on the nose. But again, you're like, but it's shot really well. It's shot really fucking well. But they're obviously not being put to sleep for the journey. So I don't know why. Again, maybe it goes into this whole the visual storytelling elements, of this dystopian world where you're still, even on a 5-star cruise, there's still an element of control in so much that come 10, 11 p.m. you're getting put to sleep. Unless, of course, you're Ruby Rod, who we will fucking get to soon.
Was Ruby Rod using his hair as a marital aid as well at that point? Because that was erect.
It was erect, and considering what he was doing, that hair had to go somewhere, I suppose. So I'm not sure if it was seen as an aid. I wouldn't put it past Ruby Rod. And yeah, I guess we'll have to deal with Ruby Rod now that we're speaking about him, her, they, them. A very modern character in many respects, especially his performance makes more sense in this world of Twitter, TikTok, gender-neutral celebrities. Yeah. You know, the fact that he films the attack as it's going on, that feels like something that would happen in 2022, not 1997. His performance, another thing in this film, which should not work. And it absolutely does, because the second half is just starting to take a bit of a dip. And then all of a sudden, you just get the utter electric shock of Ruby Rod screaming his way through this film. And again, I mentioned it earlier, Chris Tucker was such a massive star in the mid. I still think Chris Tucker now is a massive deal because he's been so picky with his roles. If suddenly you had like a mainstream movie and someone was like, Chris Tucker's in it, I'm like, a lot of people would be like, holy shit, Chris Tucker is in that film. He's back. But yeah, for him to just drop into this film, like, you know, just everything turned up to 11. It shouldn't work. And I get it why some people might find his performance annoying. I actually think he's fucking brilliant in this film. To my mind, and sorry, I will shut up in just a second, is this basic, I think George Lucas watched this film and thought, I need Ruby Rod or something like that in my movie. I think, again, if Valerian is Fifth Element gone wrong, Jar Jar Binks is Ruby Rod gone wrong. Like, I really do think they're similar characters. They serve a similar purpose. Only one of them's Chris Tucker and the other one's fucking Jar Jar Binks.
No, I totally get you. And I want to say he brings levity to an already, to a film that's already full of levity. But his character, the way he, as you said, he screams through everything. The way he like ambles through it, it brings a sense of joy to this film that you don't have previously. Like the whole green, super green thing, things like that. But there is a bit of a complication.
Him just going.
There is a bit of a complication. Once again, that wouldn't work this day, is the fact that apparently he secretly records his lovers.
Oh yeah, he's an absolute filth bag, which I absolutely. I mean, I like the fact that he's such a dirtbag and he totally gets away with it because he's that famous and everyone.
When he's walking down, like he's live on air and he's going,
Yeah.
"Oh, there's this person, and there's this person, and she's a screamer, and I'll give you a little bit of a," and he just plays a little button on his thing, and you hear a couple of noises, and then he just walks up. Like,
Yeah, playing sex tapes on like live radio, basically.
And that's another thing, isn't it? That's really interesting. The fact that it's the future, you got flying taxis, you got this cruise in space, you got all this stuff, but yet global radio is still a thing.
Well, that's one of the weirdest things about future movies, especially future movies. Like, in fairness, this is set like, what is it, 200 years in the future, something like that? Am I jumping the gun there?
No, it's I think it's more than 200, but
it's a fair bit into the future anyway. But whether it be 50 years in the future or 20 years, 200 years kind of thing, it's like quite often it's the things they couldn't imagine. It's the everyday things. All of a sudden, it's like the year is 1999, and we've kind of mastered space travel, but we're still using radios, and we don't have touchscreens, and everything's analog. It's you always get this with older films. I mean, one of the few films which I guess the film which came closest to imagining a future is, and I know it obviously hasn't played out, is 2001: A Space Odyssey. Because in that film, you see them, they're basically using iPads in that film. It's like such a subtle touch, but you compare that to like this or Blade Runner. Again, I keep using them because I do feel like they're two sides of the same coin. Same with 12 Monkeys. Suddenly it's become a three-sided coin. Is that everything is incredibly analog still. Same with Aliens, they all have, there's a lot of button pressing. There's a lot of, like every screen looks like a Commodore 64, there's no kind of like clean lines or any of that nonsense. They weren't imagining that back in like the 80s and the 90s, but it is what it is. But, space travel is as easy as pie apparently, and so are flying cars, but they're still using the radio and nobody has an iPhone. What can you do? It's just the way of things.
2263, so.
Okay, so it is a fair bit into the future.
Yeah.
Then. Yeah. 2260. Yeah, okay. I'm not going to bother doing the maths, but it's in the future, that's for sure. I'd say one of the stranger things in this film, and I'd never noticed it before, is that you think of like this film making bold decisions, like the introduction of Ruby Rhod halfway through, but there's no interaction between the primary villain and the protagonist, and that goes both sides. So if you think there's two primary protagonists. There's Corbin Dallas and there's Lilu.
Yeah.
And then there's two primary antagonists in Zorg and Mr. Darkness, whatever his name is, Mr. Shadow.
Yeah.
Lilu never meets Mr. Shadow.
No.
Because obviously he's just a big ball of fire in space or whatever. And Zorg never meets Corbin Dallas. Like, they never have an interaction. And it's great. Like, the film actually plays up on it because as they're leaving the ship as it's going down, Corbin Dallas leaves the ship, and at one of those comedy moments, he goes through one door, and then Zorg goes through the other. Zorg actually goes full Scatman Crothers in The Shining. He travels all this distance only to show up and get killed almost immediately. They really spend a lot of time building up his character, and obviously Gary Oldman's so good as Zorg, you think, there's going to be some big final showdown. And it just doesn't happen at all. He just shows up and just gets blown up without any interaction with either Corbin Dallas or Lilu. It's an unbelievable choice that I've never noticed before.
He should not, Gary Oldman or Zorg, he should not be in such a high pressure role.
No.
Because, not because he's an idiot, but because he panics. His weird plastic skull cap hair sweats a lot.
It does sweat a lot. And it also apparently bleeds brown sauce. I don't quite get what happened there between him and, because obviously it's in the moment in the film. He's on the phone, apparently.
How is Mr. Shadow making a call?
I don't know. So Mr. Shadow has stopped on his way to Earth at a payphone. He's calling Zorg, and then out of nowhere, Zorg starts, I don't want to say bleeding from his head because it's a very deliberate choice. It's not blood. It's brown sauce, which has come from I don't know fucking where, and it's just dripping down his face. He finds it very disconcerting. I mean, I probably would if somebody could magic brown sauce to drip down my face, but I don't quite know what they were going for there. Do you? I mean, I sorry, that's an impossible question because I assume your answer is I haven't got a fucking clue either.
I haven't got a clue. Like, a lot of these characters, I don't know why they're there or what they're doing. Like, a big one for me as well is, is he the president of just the US or is he the president of Earth?
I think he's the president of Earth.
Yeah. Tiny Lister.
I know, but he's so good. Why is he like? Again, you
And
talk
is
about
he-
like casting
where
in this
is
film,
he?
and
Where is that his
We don't know.
Oval Office?
or is he on a spaceship?
Yeah, because he's somewhere, and he just has a little section for like 4 or 5 priests of different religions. Like
Yeah.
they're all just sat there in some sort of theological discussion, going, I wonder what's going on. I wonder what's going on.
Yeah, I wondered that because it's, I guess, like an existential and a very real crisis is in this ball of fire is coming towards Earth. And again, it's not explained, but I wonder if they're like, well, we've never seen anything like this before. And the only thing I could compare it to was Ghostbusters. Like, you obviously get the mayor of New York,
Yeah.
and they're being attacked by ghosts, and he does get the priest in. Like, as if to say, like, is this a theological issue? Like, what the fuck are we dealing with here, kind of thing? Because obviously they find out very quickly that the military approach doesn't work because they shoot missiles at it. It only gets more powerful and becomes more quick. So I think at that point, you shoot the biggest missiles you've got, it only gets stronger, and it's still coming towards Earth. You're like, dude, I think we should call a priest. I just don't know what else to do. But again, it's all these characters we've hardly mentioned. Like Ian Holmes is Ian Holmes is
No, it is Ian Holm.
Vito Cornelius. He is fantastic in this film, and like you said, I love Tiny Lister as the president. I'm not sure it makes sense, but he's great. Gary Oldman, you make a perfect point. It's like, do you actually need him in this film? I don't know, but I'm so glad he's in it with his ridiculous. Is it like a southern state kind of accent?
I don't know what he's
Zero stones, 0 crates. No, it's like he's absolutely swinging for the fences. He's got another quote we use all the time. Oh, my favorite. You know, it's a silly throwaway line, but he makes these moments sing. But again, are these people needed? I don't know. Are they great in it? Absolutely.
There's a meme about Gary Oldman, isn't there? He's such a good actor. Are you living your life, or are you just Gary Oldman in his latest role? Because
yeah, who knows? Who knows? He's that good, and you know, I love it when you get these characters, because he's such a great actor. He's obviously an Oscar-winning actor, all the time in the world, and then you put him in a fundamentally silly role. And I assume he's taken this role because of Leon. Because he was, and he's fantastic in Leon. Again, this like quietly threatening character, but he is, as in this film, he takes that concept and pushes it to his extreme. How silly can I make this character and still make him totally threatening? And one of the reasons that works, I mean, he obviously gives the great speech about the robots. Look at all the little robots, all got something to do and stuff like that. But the scene that always jumps out is the ZF-1. Which also brings us to the point, is the ZF-1 one of the greatest weapons in movie history? I mean, the fact that they so knew that it was genius that they're like, oh, we're just going to let him do a sales pitch for this gun in the middle of this film. Again, he hardly ever uses it. It plays such a small role in the film, but obviously somebody's designed it and they're like, we've got to get this gun into this film and we've got to explain every last thing it does. Yeah. So they have Gary Oldman give a fucking sales pitch for the coolest space gun of all time in the middle of a movie. It's insane.
Why put a big red button on there though?
Why not? There's so many buttons.
Because I am such a button pusher. I'd be dead.
Yeah. Like, oh, dude, I mean, imagine giving you that gun and you look at it and there's all these things and there's a giant red button which says do not touch. Of course you would press the do not touch button.
Absolutely.
Unbelievable.
You know, going back to True Romance, one of his best roles, in my opinion, is Drexel from True Romance.
Yeah, I mean, again, another example of him swinging for the fences. But yeah, Drexel. And brilliant name as well. What if Drexel?
Yeah, Drexel Spivey, or Spivey, I think he is.
Oh my God.
We got to do True Romance.
We really do. We really do. The only other thing, I feel like, you know, we could probably wrap this up relatively soon.
Well, the fact that we haven't mentioned anything of the film, yeah, it's
strange. We haven't, but then again, I assume anyone listening to this has seen the film. You don't need us to walk you through the plot, but we can't go all the way through and not mention the fact that, like, again, this film has a sales pitch for a gun halfway through, but it also has an opera scene just halfway through the film, and again. What he does so geniusly well is like, oh, we won't just have a sex scene. We'll intercut it with a space launch. We won't just have an opera scene. We'll intercut it with one of the best action sequences in the film.
That is great. I mean, that music fits so well with with the fight scene. But I had a question about that. Was she always expecting to die?
Like, how did she put the stones inside her, and how were they coming out?
I don't know. It's like, well, the question is, if she wasn't expecting to die, I guess you could argue she would have them surgically removed. I don't want to say she's going to take the pooping option, so I assume that if she didn't know she was going to die, she would take the surgery. But then she didn't have any scar. I don't know.
If we're going down the pooping option, how did she get them in the first place? Was that a lot of Vaz that just she lubed them right there?
She is an alien. I mean, I don't know what's going on down there. There could be different things. I mean, all we know is that she's a singer. She has a very large head. And she's very blue. But other than that, in terms of the rest of her physiology, there are question marks. But I suspect that she knew that she was going to die.
Yeah.
But again, it's another one of those things in this film when they don't overthink it. They don't try and over-explain it. It just happens. They're like, we've got to get to Lee Evans and his stupid little scene on the ship.
I wanted to bring it up. I was going to say the best part of the whole film.
Well, the thing is, it is one of the coolest moments because I love, and again, those like every so often, just a little reminder that Corbin Dallas is a badass.
Yeah,
is the scene when he just pokes his hand around. He's like 6 on the left, 2 on the right, turns around, bang, 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 2 on the left, 1 on the right, whatever. And it's just kind of undercut by the fact that I hate Lee Evans, and it's just Lee Evans being Lee Evans, like totally overdoing it with his physicality and stuff. But that's one of my few minor marks. I mean, you could argue that, like you said, like the stuff with the opera singer, does it really make sense? No. But at the same time, I always ask myself, I was like, does it matter and do I care? And the answers are also no, not really. It keeps the narrative moving. I don't want 5 minutes of you explaining how they're getting those stones in and out of that woman, or whether she knows she's going to die. I'm like, just give us the cool opera scene / action sequence and let's get the fuck on with things.
One of the best Ruby Rhod performances, Chris Tucker, is when he tells him to count to 10. He says count to 10, and then when he tells him count, and he goes 1, 2, and like he's just 3, 4, 5. And in that same scene, Bruce Willis asking that deaf dude for the gun, and he gives him the billiard balls or whatever.
I don't like, right. I've defended this movie's options nonstop about having strange characters kind of pop up and knock it out the park for 5 minutes. That dude, I'm not sure he needs to be in this film at all. I don't particularly like him. I don't really get what the deal is. He doesn't leave enough of a mark on the movie. If I was going to cut I'm going to say 2 things from this film, it'd be Lee Evans and that fucking dude. And it speaks to the fact that, again, the second half isn't quite as good as the first half, but still, I enjoyed it. So is that about it? Are we happy to move on to Love and Hate? Despite the fact that we've not really mentioned much of the film. Fuck it, let's go for it. Do you want to go first?
No, mate, you go for it. It's your choice, you go.
Cool. Number 1, Mila Jovovich. I've already mentioned it. I won't go through all the details again, but I think she absolutely knocks it out of the park, and she's a large reason for why this movie works. Equally, Bruce Willis. We mentioned the fact that not any action hero could play both parts so successfully. But yeah, he totally, and their chemistry. Again, you've got to buy into their chemistry for this movie to work. And it's again to bring back to Valerian. You never bought into the chemistry between Dan DeHaan and
Dane DeHaan and Cara Delevingne.
Just never actually bought into that. And I was always a bit sad about that, because the DeHaan thing, it was like I had bought all my stock in DeHaan after watching Chronicle. I was like, he was like my white version of John Boyega. Like when we watched John Boyega and what was it, Attack the Block, we were like, this dude's going to be a star. I'm keeping an eye on this dude. He's going to be a big star. And I felt the same about DeHaan after watching Chronicle. And it felt like a lot of people felt that way, and he had his shot, but the movies didn't really work out. And he always felt slightly miscast in that, which was a bit of a shame. But anyway, going off piece there. 3, the unique visual style. 4, the cat. And 5, Gary Oldman. And the whole cast. So yes, I've snuck in a few extras there. I do apologize.
No, I'm good with that, because usually the extras you sneak in are about sequels or legacy.
No, these are all about the film. Yeah. No, it's usually hate where I have the problems in things.
So for me, number 1, I'm with you on it. The look of the film, the visual style, the effect, all still holds up. You can believe those cars are flying.
Oh, totally.
Absolutely think it looks great. Bruce, especially the name Corbin Dallas.
Oh.
Absolutely love it.
You could just have just the name. I just love the name. It's a great name.
It is an absolutely fantastic name, Corbin Dallas. And the action scene, the one in the opera room, like that whole action set piece, I think it's fantastic. It's done so well. You can clearly see where Luc Besson shines because he does a lot of these big overall action pieces in a lot of his films, even the ones he's produced. So you can see clearly where he shines with this, and I think that's done very well.
No, and I think it's an important scene actually, because it's quite strange. I think usually that scene would be the quote unquote the final scene.
Yeah.
But obviously we already mentioned there that earlier that this film has an issue that the ending is a lot more low key because you need to get it to that place. And, you know, once the stone, they're like, oh, well, how are we going to figure out this amazing conundrum? Oh, yeah. Water for water.
Yeah.
You know, it's also obvious. And they try and enforce a bit of drama with Bruce Willis and Mila Jovovich's character. But they know they've got to have that moment at the end of the film. But equally, you want the big shot. So the big shootout, the big action sequence actually happens about 20 minutes before the end of the film. And it's that sequence.
Yeah.
And it totally lives up to its billing. It's such a great scene.
And they bring that into the ending, don't they, as well, in a clever way. They've been going on about the fact that he can't strike a match throughout most of this film.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, that's what you need to make the Firestone work, is the last match.
Yeah. Again, trying to add, like they've clearly looked at that scene and gone, there's not a lot of drama in the scene. It's like, how about we kind of imply all the way through that Corbin Dallas doesn't know how to work matches. It's
also,
like, it kind of works.
The other thing being, you're in the future. You're telling me matches still exist in the future.
I know. It's like, dude, have a lighter, but what can you do?
You've got flying cars. You're telling me you can't figure out a better way to start fire.
Yeah, the matches. It's just, well, again, it's the weird analog nature of this kind of like halfway house of the future, but yeah, it is what it is.
And number 4, Lee Evans, just because he pisses you off.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Well, that'll take us nicely into hates. All right, first I'm going to get the fact that I hate the short cigarettes. I find them very stressful. As someone who doesn't smoke often, but, sorry?
Sorry, are they only because he wants to quit smoking?
No, I think that is like an enforced thing. That's like the future equivalent of having like cigarette boxes with just like the worst things in the world on them. So now you can smoke, but you can only smoke tiny cigarettes with giant butts. And I'm like, oh, what a fucking disappointment. It what it reminds me of is, I'm not sure if you ever smoked when you were younger, but one of the things you used to say, like, you know, if you were out with your mates, like boozing back when you could like smoke in clubs, is saying lasts. Oh, last on that, bruv. And they would give you like the last little bit of the cigarette to smoke. And that's what it looks like. It's just enforced lasts. So yeah, short cigarettes I find very stressful. And despite the fact, in a movie with near perfect casting, I've got 2 casting moments as my 2 and 3 for hate. One of them, unsurprisingly, Lee Evans, who I'm not a fan of. And the other one is Tricky as right arm. I just don't like him in this film. I find him quite annoying. So they're my 2 and 3.
Who is Tricky?
Is he like a rapper or some shit? I don't know. I'm not a big fan of his in this film. I find, and I feel very, this always sounds harsh, but I find his bass quite annoying.
He's done a lot of soundtracks.
Yeah.
I mean, he must have had that cockroach turned up super loud, because the way when Tiny Lister killed that cockroach, the way his earbuds popped off his head.
It was a bit Bugs Bunny, wasn't it, to be honest?
Yeah.
But,
and Acme.
One other thing I do love, and I mentioned it earlier, Sybil Buck as Zorg's assistant. My God, in 1997, what a beautiful woman. So yeah, there's that as well.
So I actually had a casting choice as well, or I guess just a character choice as one of my hates. Charlie Creed Miles as David. Didn't see the point in him.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. He just
didn't need to be there. It was more to the point. We need somebody young to pass as his wife before Corbin Dallas comes along to pass as her husband. So I believe that was the only reason Charlie Creed Miles was there.
I agree.
He was absolutely pointless for the rest of the.
Yeah, he kind of played like the whole nervous kind of like I think they were trying to play it for laughs, but it felt like it was enforced by the narrative. Like to double down on your point there, I wonder if that character existed until after they'd written the script and they'd basically just run into a wall there where we're like, we need someone to go on the ship with Lilu. It can't be Ian Holm. So we're going to have to add an extra character. And like you said, that's the only time in the film where he's ever required. I don't love the performance. Yeah, I don't hate the performance, but more to the point, you could remove him from this film. And other than that one point, what I'm sure you could write around it, it doesn't feel like he needs to be there. So yeah good shout. That's so much more better. That's so much more constructive than my I don't like Lee Evans, you know. So and I don't like Tricky's face. So yeah, you know, thank God somebody's bringing a bit of culture to this party. Jesus Christ!
Yeah, but the fact it's me, we're in the opposite land all of a sudden.
Well, yeah, but we all have our moments. I mean, earlier you were talking about how they could possibly fuck in the cryotube or wherever the hell it is. So you know, we both have our moments.
Yeah.
You know. So we both drag each other from the abyss when we need to. From the cultural abyss.
The other thing I fucking hated was the cop outfits and the weird bloody alien spacesuits they had to have. Because like you said, are they all Milla Jovovich under those fucking spacesuits? Because why? Why are they?
No, it doesn't make any sense at all. But the again, what it is, if nothing else, I don't want to say it's cool because it's not cool, but it's memorable. Yeah. It's totally memorable, and it's just part of his design where he's just like he gets designers to make his suits. Like that's part of the gist. And if you look at like a catwalk, for instance, like you get these people walking down, and none of it is practical. It's all about aesthetics, and that's all he's thinking. Like that's what happens when you get like an Italian designer to create everything from a visual perspective in this film. Nothing is making sense. Nothing is practical. It's like, oh, what will wow people? And it's like, well, that's what you end up with is cops in ridiculous outfits.
When the aliens showed up at the beginning. And they did that weird waddle to the like they're getting away from fuck all. If there was an emergency, well, clearly he couldn't get away. He got crushed by the doors. But all I could think of at that point when you saw the waddle was, my God, Luc Besson has watched Super Mario Brothers a bit much. Specifically, the scene in the lift when they're making the Goombas dance.
Oh, it does. When you said Super Mario Brothers, like any normal person, I was thinking of the game, and I was like, "What is it? Is he thinking about the way like Bowser?" What I was like, "No, Bowser can move at a decent." No, of course you're talking about the movie, and yes, I know exactly what you mean. And it totally does. It's the Goombas dancing in the lift.
Model is the Goombas dancing.
I don't know. It does drive me crazy when you. And in fairness, it drives the evil wizard guy crazy as well. Where he even makes a joke. He's like, "Come on. You're nearly there, just a little bit quicker." It's like time is irrelevant, only life or whatever it is. Tries to make it big and important again. But you're like, dude, you wouldn't be crushed if you weren't in these needlessly giant suits, and you don't need them because you all look like Milla Jovovich underneath. So I'm not buying it. And she moves around so swiftly. Yeah, like she's so athletic. What the hell is she doing in that suit? It makes no sense.
The other, my third one, and I can't believe we're still talking about hate. My third hate.
It feels like you've had about 72 in fairness.
Is the absolute needless and Luke Perry. I don't get it.
I don't get it.
I really like Luke Perry. I think he's a good actor. But was he still doing 90210? Was he still a heartthrob in 97? How did you have the and Luke Perry moment? I don't
know. There's no answer for how Luke Perry, as I said, I think his agent has just fucking knocked out the park with this cast. You would think in this film, you watch this film and you're like, surely it's and Chris Tucker or it's and Gary Oldman. They're the obvious ones, because it's always like you have a big cast. Sorry, excuse me. You're like, obviously you have Bruce Willis top, you have Milla Jovovich second, and I guess Gary Oldman would probably be third billing, and I think they're all on the poster together, so they'd probably be the top three billing.
That is so he's filled.
Yeah, and how is that happen? How is usually the and is to say, oh, look, we've also got this really big star in a smaller role. In 1997, the and is 100% Chris Tucker. 100% the and is, you go through the top three, then you go through, Tiny Lister, and you go through all the cast, and at the end of it, you have and fucking Chris Tucker. But instead, it's Luke goddamn Perry for, as you say, 45 seconds of work, a few years after the whole 90210 craze has already died down. So I don't know how that happens. I think it might be the strangest and in movie credits history. I really do.
Yeah, because I'm looking at his filmography. He did Buffy the Vampire Slayer in 92, which I actually didn't mind that film.
Yeah, but it wasn't a hit.
No, not at all. And then he's done films you've never heard of. 8 Seconds, Normal Life, American Strays, and then he did Fifth Element.
Well, like I said, I had never noticed it before, but when I was rewatching the film for this podcast, I had an audible reaction to when I saw it. I was like, and fucking Luke Perry. What the fuck? I was like, how has that happened? I was like, I must have missed it. I was like, he must have been in a film I can't think of. And as you've just proved, that didn't happen.
No.
That didn't happen. All I could think of was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I was like, that would have been like 4 or 5 years earlier. And also, it was Buffy the fucking Vampire Slayer. Nobody went to see that film. The only reason anybody remembers that film is because of the TV show. Yes, I appreciate that you and I both saw that film in the mid-90s before the TV show.
Yeah.
But we are very much in the minority there, that's for sure.
Don't get me wrong, I like Luke Perry.
Yeah.
I just don't understand, because especially if his character had more to do in the film, like if his character came back, like he was frozen by the aliens or something like that, his character came back, I could possibly understand the and Luke Perry.
No, I'm not having it. Even if he did, it's still Luke Perry in 1997 in a movie with an amazing cast. If he was in it for 20 minutes, he still shouldn't get the and. He should have been like, if he's in this film for 15, 20 minutes, has a meaty role, he's still 7th billed in this movie, and he should be nowhere, unless, I don't know, they hadn't quite got down the idea of the and at that point. I don't know. Like, nowadays, the and is a big deal.
Oh.
Like even to the point where they don't just have and, they also have with now.
Yeah.
They do they'll have like the top 7 or 8 billing, then they'll have with someone, a big name in a small role, and an even bigger name in an even smaller role. God, fucking Luke Perry, man. Anyway, we got to move on from Luke Perry. It makes no sense. Jesus Christ. Do you have any facts, sir?
I do have
any
facts.
Luke Perry related facts.
I do have facts, but I've just come across a picture of a really happy Bruce Willis, because he is just in a picture with all of the air hostesses in their outfits.
Yeah, they're all supermodels, of
Yeah.
course. It's a Luke Besson film from the 90s. Every female character is a supermodel. It's just, that's the way of things.
Yeah, I got some facts.
Yeah, let's go for it. Yeah, I thought, honestly, you went quiet there for a second. I was like, are you just going to keep looking at the supermodels while we're recording a podcast silently? I was like, Jesus Christ, that's a bold move.
Yeah, I'm struggling. The divine language spoken by Lilu was invented by co-writer and director Luc Besson, and further refined by Milla Jovovich, who had little trouble learning and developing it, as she was already fluent in 4 languages. The language had only 400 words. He and Milla Jovovich held conversations and wrote letters to each other in the language as practice. By the end of filming, they were able to have full conversations in this language. I love the amount of detail and work they put into this language. For this language to barely be used in the film.
Yeah, but when she does, it actually feels like she is speaking fluently in an alien language. Like that extra work totally, like usually, you have people on screen and they're obviously doing Klingon or whatever fucking language it is, and it's nonsense. Because she really does rattle on, and it ends in big bada boom, doesn't it? When she just like, yap, 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 big bada boom. He's like, okay, I got that big bada boom. But when she's talking before it, I totally buy into the fact that she's speaking an alien language and a million miles per hour. So yeah, the hard work totally paid off.
Luc Besson wrote the original screenplay when he was in high school. He had conceived the story of the movie and invented the world of the movie as a child so he could escape his lonely childhood. He began writing the script when he was 16, though it was not released in theatres until he was 38.
Fair enough.
Interesting
facts.
Yeah, the other one, when the president tells Father Vito Cornelius he has 20 seconds to state his point, Vito talks for exactly 20 seconds.
Does he really?
Yeah.
I was thinking about counting it. When he does talk, it does feel like longer than 20 seconds, but fair enough. 20 seconds it is.
Bruce Willis ad-libbed the line, "Look, lady, I only speak 2 languages, English and bad English." And you keep saying about the quotes you use for this film. I've used that quote quite a few times.
Yeah. He's great. Well, it's like we go through a whole bunch of them, but this film is mega quotable.
The animatronic mechanisms used for the Mangalore masks were later recycled for the Neimoidians in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
Oh, okay.
Neimoidians. It sounds like a diarrhea medicine.
Yeah, it does a bit. And I can't place them in Episode 1 at all.
I'm probably butchering the fucking name.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. In most shots of Gary Oldman, there's a circle around his head. In fact, the circle in the middle of the frame is a nearly constant motif in this movie. Bruce Willis, on the other hand, is more often framed by a rectangle or doorway behind him. I didn't picture that. I can think of it now, but yeah.
But again, it speaks to like the effort gone in and the fact that like so much has gone into the visual design of this film. And that is, again, I think like the narrative like works. The narrative is actually pretty standard stuff. You know, the whole savior thing and all that jazz. I think what people remember beyond the characters, of course, is that visual design. Everyone remembers what Fifth Element looked like because there are so few films that look like it.
Yeah. The diva, the one who had the stones inside her, she was played by
the Albanian opera singer.
Yeah, Diva Plavalaguna. She's played by Luc Besson's fiance at the time. She took the role after the original actress failed to show up. Like, how do you fail to just show up?
I know, to a massive movie like that as well. You do get these moments though, like where it's just like somebody got ill or somebody doesn't show up or somebody shits the bed. Not literally. I mean, you know, I'm thinking of like Back to the Future, where it's like, you know, they show up, they don't do the role, and then suddenly you get, you know, farmed in and it becomes one of the biggest movies of all time. Obviously, that's not the case, but this song is still used on like, what is it? It's like the Impossible Diva dance song it's referred to. So it's like, you know, people still try and do this on those kind of weird shows where people come out and do songs because it's got such a big range kind of thing. And again, it works great on stage, doesn't it? And it's from a movie. That tends to help.
The next two facts I've got is about Luc Besson figuring out how to get Bruce Willis to act, I'm guessing. Because both of them are basically, Luc Besson didn't tell Bruce Willis. So when Corbin first meets Leeloo and she starts talking to him in her language, Luc Besson didn't tell Bruce Willis what Milla Jovovich was going to say to him. So Bruce's reactions are real. The wonder on Bruce Willis's face when the diva sings is real. That was the first time he'd heard it and seen the actress in full makeup. So this is like, don't tell Bruce anything. Just if we want to get some drama from him.
He's got it in. He's clearly got it in the locker, though. Again, I keep coming back to 12 Monkeys. Another famous scene of Bruce Willis is when he hears, is it, again, I think it might be classical music when he's in the back of the car and he starts crying.
Yeah.
Like, that's another sequence of him just reacting to classical music, and he's fantastic in that. I'm sure in that scene they told him he was going to be listening to classical music in the back of the car, but maybe Luc Besson wasn't giving him enough credit. But who knows? Maybe he'd only seen Die Hard. It's like, this is just an action guy. He doesn't have the range. He has the range.
The movie was supposed to be a trilogy. Luc Besson had 3 scripts, but then he decided to condense them into one. So it'd be interesting to see do they explore more planets? Do they explore more of the aliens? Like, if he's got 3 scripts and they're an hour and a half a piece. That's
I could get there's a lot in this world. I mean, we mentioned some of the stuff already where you're like, all right, this isn't really explained, but we're just getting on with it. And there are elements of that idea that there was a longer script, or as you're just saying there, 3 scripts for 3 movies, and they've decided to condense it down into one. And yes, of course, you hardly learn anything about like the aliens, for instance, like the Mandashawan and the Mangalores. You don't really get to know anything about them other than the fact that the Mangalores have a cause, or the cause is, God, I absolutely butchered the impression then. But you don't actually learn anything about them really. So that's all set aside. That could be like, 40 minutes of another movie. So there's plenty to work with in terms of the world building he's established here. But yeah, I think it works as one film just fine.
The Fhloston Paradise model weighed over 500 pounds. Can you imagine moving that thing?
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
The old days, before CG.
This is selected as the opening film for the 1997 Cannes Film Festival.
That speaks to the quality of it. This isn't just any kind of old jack shit sci-fi movie. This is one of the best sci-fi movies of the 90s.
Yes. Milla Jovovich, as we already said, is great in this film. She beat out over 3,000 women who auditioned for the role.
Bloody hell. Yeah. Well, they chose wisely in the end, I think.
Well, it'd be interesting to know, I mean, not all 3,000, but what other women were up for it.
What other women? What other supermodels were up for the role? Let's be clear. Maybe I wonder if Cindy Crawford was involved, because she was doing acting in the mid-90s, wasn't she? She was kind of dipping a toe into that world.
Yeah.
I don't think she would have worked, of course. Like I said, I think Milla Jovovich is perfect in this role. But yeah, you can imagine the casting call would have been quite interesting.
Right, last one then, because there's quite a few for this, but this one's the original choice for the part of Corbin Dallas.
No
Jean
idea.
Reno.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Well, he would have worked. He's got a similar vibe.
Yeah.
Like, you could buy him as an everyday man, but at the same time, as he's proven with, multiple movies since, is like, yeah, you could totally have him as a badass as well. So, yeah, I think Bruce Willis, Jean Reno, they're kind of, as an almost perfect alternate casting, albeit a French one. I think he'd be perfect for this role. I'm not saying I want to see Bruce Willis replaced because I think he's fantastic in the role, but yeah, I think Jean Reno would have totally worked. Although, would you have bought into the Jean Reno Mila Jovovich romance in the same way? I don't know. Maybe he does have that Gallic charm, perhaps. I don't know. Not having it?
No, I don't know. I don't know if I can see anyone other than Bruce Willis in it now, but I mean, I can't see Jean Reno as the love interest, unfortunately.
That's my issue. I buy him as an everyday dude who's also a super badass, super soldier, but I don't necessarily buy into the romance part of it, and that's probably why I went to Bruce Willis. Yeah. And even that is one. You're pushing it there because he was quite a bit older than Mila Jovovich, but they've got enough chemistry that you just enough pull it off. So
make him look younger. They gave him blonde hair.
Yeah. Because what would he have been at the time? Like 40 something?
Yeah, he was late
45.
He was late 30s, wasn't he, when he did Die Hard? So.
Yeah, it would have been, late 40s maybe. Yeah. I don't know. He's always been late 40s. He's just one of those guys who's always looked like he was in his late 40s. But if that's it for facts, Legacy, I mean, we've mentioned some of this already, but I mentioned at the top, one of Bruce Willis's best movies. I don't think that's too much, not his best movie, but if you were picking the IMDb style, you're going to type it in now, and the IMDb, is this one of his movies? It comes up with a bunch of pictures for the films which you kind of relate to him.
If you click on Bruce Willis, this is one of the ones that pops up.
Yeah. I thought I would have this at number 4 or 5 in terms of, I'm not saying his best performance, although again you could put it'd be in the arguments, but I would have this in his kind of one of his top 5 roles, albeit at the lower end. Obviously you have Die Hard or whatever at top, and probably The Sixth Sense and stuff. But in the number 4, 5 role, I'd totally have Fifth Element. Again, I already mentioned earlier, best sci-fi movies of the 90s. I think it's one of the most beloved sci-fi movies of the 90s. And remember, this is an era of really imaginative, big budget sci-fi. I mean, a lot of it obviously came from Roland Emmerich. I think of Stargate and Independence Day. But a lot of these films, like The Fifth Element, they were swings for the fences to give movies like that. They weren't franchises. They were just concepts where they managed to get reasonably big names attached to them. And they're all right, can I have a huge pot of money to make this kind of bizarre sci-fi concept that I've got stuck in my head, or that I drew in a fucking school book when I was 16 or whatever it was in Luc Besson's instance. And I love the fact that back in the 90s, you got these films. And obviously not all of them work. But when I look back and I think of, again, the aforementioned Independence Day, Stargate, and then this, I'm like, man, those are 3 great sci-fi films. But I think this might be the most beloved of the bunch, and certainly the one that's arguably aged the best. Don't get me wrong, I know Independence Day was one of the biggest films of all time. I'm not sure if that has aged quite as well as this film. This film has a timeless quality to it, I think. And I think it comes back to the fact that Luc Besson is an auteur. In the same way, if you go back and watch Tim Burton films from the 80s, they don't feel like 80s films. They feel like Tim Burton films because they've got his visual style all over them. The same with Batman or whatever. And I think you have the same thing with Fifth Element. It doesn't feel like a 90s film. It just feels like a Luc Besson film.
The good thing as well about this is it doesn't feel a million miles away for the future. I mean, we've all been promised flying cars since
Back to the Future too.
Yeah. So the fact that, all right, this is set, like you said, 200 years in the future, and all we did is move up. Skyscrapers just went up. You can imagine that they're living their lives, flying about and everything. And then in the bottom, on the ground, is probably Judge Dredd in Mega City 1.
100%.
It kind of has that feeling that would be... So I totally get it. And I totally understand why it holds up. You get into space, it all looks clean. And I think that's the good thing about making it bright and jovial, because usually when you get the darkness of it, the grittiness of it, I mean, Blade Runner kind of loses its look the more you watch it as time goes on. I don't think that holds up as well.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Oh, I strongly disagree. I think I think it totally holds up, but it's a completely different world.
But again, I've seen Blade Runner twice and I'm not a fan of it. So.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I'm a massive fan of Blade Runner, so we probably feel very differently about it. But yeah, I think it just comes down to visual design, and to take the complete opposite approach of what you said then. It's the same way Blade Runner, I actually think, does hold up, is because you do have this consistent universe, albeit a very depressing version. Whereas this, you still get the totalitarian Jesus Christ, I can't speak, element of it all, but it's all done with everybody wearing bright pink and bright orange, and I think it totally works. But in terms of legacy, I mean, this film was a pretty big hit. You mentioned the whole like fact that could it be considered a cult movie if it made 260 million at the box office? Apparently, we decided it could. I mean, I found it quite interesting to look at his other films. Like Lucy made nearly 500 million, and even Valerian, which I think of as being this like famous flop, made 226 million globally. So I think it did flop because I think it cost so much, but it wasn't as bad as I thought.
Lucy's coming back, isn't it? I read.
Yeah, as a TV show.
As a TV show with possibly Morgan Freeman reprising his character.
Of course, yeah. There's no way. What's her name's coming back for a TV show? What's her name? Scarlett Johansson. Thank you very much. And as mentioned, it's hugely quotable, and that's about it I've got for Legacy. In terms of like score and soundtrack, other than the Little Light of Love by Eric Serra, like really being the only thing that ages this film, like, you know, when they're having sex and you have like the freeze frame and the aggressive lighting at the end of this film, I'm like, I really don't actually like that bit. It's probably my least favorite bit of the film, other than Lee Evans, of course. For the most part, it's actually really good and helps rein in the tone. Like where it needs to, it adds a sense of wonder. Where it needs to, it adds a sense of threat. Some of this score actually sounds like a Japanese RPG, where some of it sounds like a romantic jazz element of like something like Blade Runner. I think the score of this film does a lot of hard work because the tone is all over the place.
Yeah.
But it keeps pushing you in the right direction, because one minute there's like a serious threat, but then the next minute is playing it for laughs. Then you're really going for that sense of like awe and wonderment. And the score is constantly helping you shift tone with the movie rather than it becoming confusing, like a bit of a mess. And I think it does it really successfully. So, and you know, obviously he's happy with the work because Eric Serra is a frequent collaborator with Luc Besson. So, but it's something I hadn't really noticed until I watched it again this time, like how quickly the tone moves and how quickly the music moves with the tone to make it an easier transition, as it were, for you. In terms of video games, there was actually a really rubbish third-person shooter on the PC and PlayStation. I remember playing it. It was absolutely pants. It was like a really shit siphon filter, and it was before, like, you know, it was a third-person shooter before dual analog sticks really became a thing. And if you go back, it's one of those awkward, every step it feels like you could just fall off the edge into a bottomless pit. The shooting's terrible. It was a rough game back in 97, 98 when it was released, and obviously it's not one you'd want to go back to now. I think we've used this example a few times, but sadly it's a perfect, you know, in terms of, you know, taking a game and basically just changing the visual design ever so slightly. It's Eidos Montreal and Guardians of the Galaxy. You want to take the same company, I love the setup of that, where you have just enough, you know, on the ship, you know, that kind of back and forth. There's a big emphasis on the dialogue in that game, and I think you'd need it for any kind of reasonable adaptation of The Fifth Element. And then you have the action sequences, and obviously this film lends itself pretty well to that, where you'd have Corbin Dallas with a gun, and then you could shift to Lilu for the melee section. So yeah, I would go with Eidos Montreal and Guardians of the Galaxy, basically, and just rip them off and just make it Fifth Element.
I like that idea. I was thinking something completely different. I'll say what I was going to say in a sec, but now I'm thinking about it, I think you've won this wrong, because that captures everything, doesn't it? The lightheartedness, the colourfulness, of
the different locations and everything. Yeah, the tone isn't a million miles off.
Because I was thinking, especially Human Revolution is Deus Ex.
Yeah, that's a more somber take, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
yeah. I mean, you got the protagonist would easily become Corbin Dallas.
Yeah.
But and then the mission is obviously finding the stones, doing stones, probably rescuing Lilu first, things like that. But yeah. Deus Ex feels like it could work as well. But I said you've won in regards to that. It's got to be.
Yeah, I just feel like, you know, you got that excuse to kind of swap between characters, and I think tonally they're already kind of halfway there. And as I said, that emphasis on bantery kind of writing, you know, and mix, and again, that combination between this is all lighthearted but maintaining an actual threat. I think that's kind of captured in the game as well. And a big part of it is that I think I just quite like that game, basically.
I'm surprised that game hasn't been as big as it should have been, because I think it's fantastic. I think it came out at the right time. It did for me what Marvel's Avengers video game failed to do.
But I think that was the problem. I think the reason this didn't do. I think if this game came out before Marvel's Avengers, the video game, I think it would have done much better. But I think they saw it. And the problem is, at a glance, for say you're not, if you're not like massively into video games, if you've played Marvel's Avengers, not only, even if you haven't played it, you've seen it, you've heard about it, it was a bit of a flop, it didn't really work. And you've got another game where you've got these Marvel characters, which almost look like the characters from the movies, but they're not quite the same.
Yeah.
And you had the same thing with the Guardians of the Galaxy issue, where they're like, oh, it's like the Guardians of the Galaxy, but they're not quite the same as in the movie. And I think people then immediately just associated it with the Marvel's Avengers game. And it just like people like, well, that didn't work, so this isn't going to work. So it almost got like a bad rap before it came out. And of course, it couldn't be further from the truth, because everywhere that Marvel Avengers, the video game, failed, Guardians of the Galaxy, the video game, succeeded. It's like literally every mistake they made for Marvel's Avengers, they got it right in Guardians of the Galaxy. So it's a bit of a shame it didn't do as well as it really should have, because that is such a good game. So well written. Again, no emphasis on like buying stuff or needless endgame content. It's just a decent what. And again, I've mentioned, we were talking just for this podcast about these, as great as the Sony third-party stuff is, so many of these games are just too fucking long. God of War doesn't need to be 34 hours long. Last of Us Part 2 doesn't need to be 30 hours long. I think Guardians of the Galaxy was like 16 hours long. Like that is the sweet spot for one of these kind of like, narrative-based action games where you're just like, get 16 hours, I'm never bored of it. There's no downtime. It's just start to finish, excited all the way through, and it's done. And it's just like, it was one of my favorite games of last year. It was 2021. But, this has suddenly turned into an advert for Guardians of the Galaxy, the video game.
You said about God of War as well being 34 hours long. I've got that. I've told you already, and I'm playing it. I can't believe that there is videos on YouTube, like walkthroughs already. It's been out since Wednesday. It's been out for 4 fucking days.
It doesn't matter. Some people are psychos.
How are people not sleeping? Like, don't they have lives anymore? And
they don't.
That's coming from a person that, all right, used to do the same fucking thing. I'd buy a video game and I'd play it for 24 hours. But
really?
Wow. Now I'm an adult. I can't do it. And I get an hour here or there before my kid tells me it's time to put Disney Plus on.
Even without the issue of like less time as you've grown up because of jobs or whatever nonsense, it's like even when I was younger, I never did that. I was never the person to kind of play a game. Like I rarely play any video game for longer than like a 3-4 hour stretch. I'm just like, all right, that's enough of that. Because and it's the same with TV shows. I know some people, these shows come onto Netflix or whatever, and it's like, it came out yesterday, and someone's like, oh, have you seen season 1 of whatever? I'm like, dude, it came out yesterday. Like, oh yeah, I watched it for 10 hours. I'm like, after like 3 hours, it's just like, I'm watching it, but I'm not paying attention anymore.
Yeah.
It's just having no impact. I'm just dull to everything because it's just too long. It's the same with video games. I don't know how people can play a video game for 30 hours straight and enjoy it. I'd be like, fuck, I'd be so tired of it after like 4 hours. But hey ho, we all do things in different
Especially in this day and age, you're going to need at least 2 controllers, aren't you?
Oh, it's absolute madness. Absolute madness. In terms of scores and recommendations, mine's pretty easy. It's a 4-star film, a very strong 4-star film, and I would absolutely recommend it because it totally holds up. I legitimately, other than 1 or 2 CG moments where you're like, I can kind of see this is a 90s film. I think for the most part, its emphasis on physical effects, on those suits, the fact that as we've already mentioned, the visual design is still so unique. I think it still looks great 25 years later, whatever the hell it is. I'm not going to try. Yeah, 25 years later. 4 stars. Easy recommendation for anyone who hasn't seen it.
Same.
Oh, and if you have seen it, watch it again because it's still great.
Same. It's a 4-star film. It's the story elements, the obvious casting choices aside, it does really well. So it definitely is a 4-star film. And yes, I would recommend it to others. You have a fun time watching this film. You really enjoy it. You enjoy the relationship between the two as the film goes on. And yes, the second half kind of fails story-wise, but picks up action-wise as it goes on. So, I mean...
No, I agree. The second half isn't... It's not quite as fun as the first half, but it does have the action stuff. So,
yeah. So, no, it's definitely worth a watch again. And as you've already said, if you have seen it, just watch it again. It's
yeah. All right, so next week, your choice. What are we going for, sir?
Well, actually, this is a new one on me because we're actually pushing into the 2000s, into the late 2000s.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Is this going to be our most recent film?
I think so. It's 2010.
Yeah, that'd be a movie. Oh, unless you count our bonus Zack Snyder's Justice League podcast, which we don't. So yeah, this will be our most recent film by quite a distance, I think.
Yeah. So the reason we're doing this is because my niece asked me to cover this film. I love this film. I'm pretty sure you do as well. My niece asked me to cover this film as an engagement present.
Well, at least it's cheap. So
Yeah.
and I feel like I would have contributed, despite the fact I don't know your niece. That's quite nice.
Yeah. Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
A film where most people would be like, "What the fuck is Tucker and Dale versus Evil?"
Yeah.
It's okay. Just to jump ahead, spoiler alert. Recommend absolutely, and we still recommend this all the time to anyone who'll listen. I was recommending it just this Halloween to anyone, like oh, what Halloween films I watch? Tucker and Dale. Watch fucking Tucker and Dale if you haven't seen it. It's a great film. Great choice, sir.
My niece was 12 in 2010, and I got her to watch this film, and she loves this film. She absolutely loves it.
That's weird, isn't it? Because she was 12, so she wouldn't necessarily got the whole references. Like, I feel like for this film to really work, you need to have seen like a bunch of 80s horror films. You need to have kind of seen Deliverance for it to really work, which is a 70s film, obviously. But yeah, Tucker and Dale, Tucker and Dale, one of the absolute gems of the last 50.
Yeah.
When was it released? 2010.
2010.
That's 12 years ago.
Yeah.
It is, to some people, that is a very old film, which is quite depressing. But
and I really want my sequel. I don't usually beg for sequels, but I want my sequel to this film.
I want a sequel, but I'm like, is the joke run? I don't know. Well, we'll discuss that next week. So yes, thank you for listening to The Fifth Element. Please do join us for Tucker and Dale versus Evil, which is going to be super fun because that film is absolutely awesome. And cheers, guys. Bye.
Yeah, cheers, guys. See you next week. I keep saying see you next week. Nobody fucking sees us.
I know. It's ridiculous. Catch you. Bye.
Ta-da.
So where can people actually find us?
Oh, well, people can actually find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. You can also drop us an email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. We like to read them out on the show, so please feel free to send them in. Any recommendations, just get in touch with us. We do like that. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing.
Cheers, Darry. And a big thank you to Alexander Ortolan for the awesome intro music. He has no media presence as far as I can tell. He's very mysterious, but makes great music. So thank you very much.
And we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Hey, you